Hello Simon, hello Robert. Welcome to SITA press agency. Welcome to Slovakia. What brings you here?
We were invited to come and give a masterclass about what we call competitive identity, which is the images of countries. And Slovakia is today quite interested in its international image. And so we were asked to come and spend the day explaining how that works to people.
Okay. You invented the term of nation branding. For some people, that means just the tourism. For some people, it means attracting the capital. For some people, it doesn't matter at all.
Yeah.
They think it's waste of taxpayers' money and time. How do you define it?
How long have you got? Yesterday we spent 7 hours answering that question, and I think everybody had the feeling that we'd only just scratched the surface of it. This is actually a really, really big and really complex subject because it touches on so many things. It's about politics, it's about culture, it's about international relations, it's about psychology, it's all kinds of things. But I think the simplest explanation of all is the one I started with when I first used that phrase back in the 1990s, which is that countries have images in the modern world, in the globalized, connected world. And those images are incredibly important because they affect the behavior of people in other countries. And Slovakia, just like any other country, depends enormously on external sources of revenue, respect, attention, and so forth. Talent, all of those things. And countries that have good, powerful, positive images find that everything is relatively cheap and everything is relatively easy. You know, if you're Switzerland and you have a fantastic image, everybody wants to invest their money there. Everybody wants to live and work and study there. Everybody wants to buy Swiss products. On the other hand, if you have a negative image, a bad image, or a weak image, nobody knows who you are, everything is difficult and everything is expensive. So that's basically our starting point. Now, nation branding is a phrase that I slightly regret having coined because it makes it sound too easy. It makes it sound like a marketing mystery. Yep. You know, if you spend enough money on your logo, on your slogans, on advertising campaigns, the impression people have is that it's very easy and very expensive. And actually what we've spent the last 20 years trying to explain to people is that it's the other way around. It's very cheap, but it's very difficult because it doesn't involve communications. It's not propaganda. You can't tell the world Slovakia is different from what you think because they're not even listening. What you have to do is you have to prove that Slovakia is relevant to people in their daily lives, and that's a challenge.
Okay.
The problem with the term brand is that people believe that you can deploy the same methods that you do in the commercial world, logos, slogans, and advertising campaigns in the same way to places. And that is just not true. And that's, again, why we spent yesterday hours and hours to explain what are the tools that we usually use when we refer to branding, and which ones of those tools actually work when we're talking about places or don't work when we're talking about places. And the focus should be on the idea of brand purpose. So who are we as a country? Who are we as a nation? Who are we as a people? What's our mentality? Where did we come from? Who are we today? Where do we want to go? To then come up with an idea of how you want to position yourselves. So what is the image that you would like the world to have of your country? And then to make sure that you reflect that positioning in your behavior. And that's very different from commercial brands. Why? Because in commercial branding, corporations and companies have control over what they call the brand touch points. So they have control over the packaging, over how you're being presented in the supermarket. But of course, a country like Slovakia is not in the supermarket. You're not being there out for sale. So you don't really have control over the touch points. And places are being talked about all the time in the news, in the mainstream media and the social media, far more so than commercial brands are. So the methods are very, very different.
North Korea is the best branded country on the planet because it is like a corporation. It's because it's not in any sense a democracy. It's run by one guy, a chief executive officer, and his vision of where the country should stand, universally recognized as a slightly scary place that you shouldn't mess with. He's communicated that brand perfectly, 100%. Whoever you ask anywhere in the world, they give you the perfect description of how Kim Jong-un wants North Korea to be perceived. So if you don't have the inconvenience of a democracy, it's actually quite straightforward.
Actually, North Korea was one of my questions in the list. That recently I just noticed that the ads on how the life is beautiful in North Korea are just popping up on social networks.
Oh,
and,
really? Okay.
It's interesting to watch it.
Yeah.
Because I lived in that system for some time, you
Sure.
know, so I can relate to
Yeah.
what they say, how they present it. But it's just unbelievable that it can even reach me.
Yeah. That's not going to work, by the way.
Oh,
Telling
not with me. Not with me.
Well, not for anybody. I mean, telling the world that everybody lives well in North Korea,
Yeah.
I think everybody knows that's not true. But in any case, that's not really the image they should be trying to obtain, because it's not credible. Anyway.
Their neighbors have been very successful in nation branding, South Korea.
Absolutely.
So it's one of the countries that has been able to climb up most steadily in the Nation Brands Index that Simon created. It's a system of measurement, survey-based, that's been running for 20 years. And South Korea is the most successful country in there, but consistently because of its behavior, because of popular culture, cuisine. It's made a concerted effort to push out the behavior of the country in an attractive manner. And particularly social media has helped them.
Back then.
It's the first new country since the United States that has fans. There are people all over the world who are fans of South Korea. They've got no connection with it, but they want to eat the food, they want to cook the food, they want to go there on holiday. They aspire to have South Korea in their lifestyle. It's extraordinary.
K-pop is a
K-pop
super
was a really
successful-
important part of it, yeah.
Yeah.
But Gangnam Style was the determining
Oh.
moment for the West.
Absolutely. Absolutely. The automotive industry as well. So
They copied the Japanese model basically, but they did it in about half the time.
yeah. Nation branding, it's not a static thing. So it's not that you came to Bratislava yesterday, you're going to advise somebody, they, said it, they do it as you say it, and then, 3 months down the road, there is some geopolitical thing or technological change can bring a lot of things. How has it changed over the years since you started it?
Well, I think the way that our work has changed is that we tend to do less and less of the work ourselves, and we do more and more what they call capacity building in the development industry. Because we have a very strong view that this should be the responsibility of the government, of the business sector, and of civil society, and academia and other partners, because the image of the country doesn't belong to the government, not even temporarily. It belongs to the population. And Slovakia's good name is a very precious national asset. And it's the population ultimately that benefit if it's in a good condition, and they're the ones who suffer ultimately if it's not in good condition. So increasingly what we do these days is we teach the government how to drive and then give them the key, with the hope and the expectation that after we've gone, they will start to figure out how to do this themselves, because it's a long-term program. It's not a campaign. It's not a thing that you do over a year and spend a huge amount of money on. We often say that doing this properly is more a prism through which you should see governance, not just in the public sector, but also in the private sector. How leaders make policy, make decisions, how they behave internationally. One really good international policy will do more for your country's image than 100 million euros spent on a campaign. Because people don't listen to propaganda, as I said before. And Slovakia's problem is not that it's got a negative image, it's got a weak image. People, compared to other EU member states, it's a country that people around the world don't know very much about at all. And it's not a bad place to start. But the problem with that is that they're also not interested in hearing about it. So you can spend as much money as you want saying, the Porsche Cayenne is manufactured here. But because people aren't interested in Slovakia, they're not interested in that fact. And that's the difficulty.
Well, we have the budgets, we have the agencies in Slovakia, we currently even have a new minister for tourism, which is part of nation branding. And despite of budget and efforts and people trying to do their best, when you look at the index of your index of the countries, Slovakia comes out as dull. That's what I found out there. What do we do wrong?
I don't think you did anything wrong. I think you just didn't do anything very interesting or exciting or relevant to people in other countries. We often get governments contacting us and saying, what can we say to make ourselves famous? And our reply is always wrong question. The correct question is, what can we do to make ourselves relevant? And we always start with the audience. We don't start with the country. And what is often wrong with these campaigns that countries try over and over again, Slovakia is no exception, and most countries do this, is that they start with the country and they say, what have we got? What are our assets? And people are proud, nationalistic patriots, and they get very excited, making long lists of all the wonderful things, the mountains, the rivers, the trees, the buildings, the history, the culture, the famous tennis players, and God knows what else. and then having made that list, they then say, can we find some idiots out there who might be interested in that, right? And this is not how you do it. It should be the other way around. You start with a very close and very careful examination of the world, of the people out there, and you say, what are they looking for today that they can't get anywhere else? What do they want to learn that Slovakia could teach? What do they want to buy that Slovakia could sell? What do they want fixed that they think is broken and that maybe Slovakia could fix for them? And that last question is the most important one, because all of our analysis of all of the data we've collected over the last 20 years clearly shows the people around the world are not interested in what goes on inside your country. Right? They just don't care. They don't care whether Slovakia is well governed or badly governed. They don't care whether the schools are good or bad. They don't care even whether the landscape is beautiful. They do if they're tourists, but that's a totally different matter. What they care about is the impact that Slovakia has on the world that they live in. As I said before, relevance. And so when I go to sleep at night, I'm not worrying about whether Slovakia's roads are well made or full of potholes. I'm just thinking, do I feel glad that Slovakia exists? Is it doing something to make the world a bit less tumultuous, a bit less problematic for my children and my grandchildren? So all of the indications are, it's just like corporate social responsibility in the commercial field. Companies have finally realized that if they want a good image, if they want people to trust them, if they want the loyalty of their customers, they have to be good members of society. They have to contribute something to society. They can't just sit there and make money. And what we found through the research is that it's exactly the same for countries. People admire countries that behave themselves in the international domain, that contribute something. So you say, what have we done wrong? You haven't done anything wrong. You just haven't done anything right. And, you know, what has Slovakia done for me in the last year if I'm not Slovakian? If I live in Eritrea or Guatemala? Nothing. So you have to start doing stuff. It's your duty. It's got nothing to do with branding. Everybody has to do stuff because we're faced by gigantic challenges like climate change and migration and poverty and inequality and pandemics. And every country can and must dedicate some part of its activities to trying to fix the world because the world is broken. And incidentally, if you do that, it will improve your image. And incidentally, if you improve your image, you'll get a whole lot more foreign revenues. So it's good for the economy, and it is entirely compatible with good domestic governance. You know, it's not, do we worry about the world or do we worry about our own people? No, you worry about both. You do them at the same time.
We have to also be very clear about the causality of things. So we argue, and it's generally argued also in the research, that if you have a strong image, then everything becomes easier. So it's easier to attract tourists, it's easier to export products, it's easier to attract talent, it's easier to attract investment. But the mistake that many are making is that they then believe that the reverse is also true. So in order to get a better image, we just need to do more tourism promotion, we just need to more investment promotion, talent attraction, and that's not the case. So we clearly need to distinguish between the idea of brand and image and how to build a reputation, which Simon has just explained, versus marketing. So it's fine to sell a tourism product to tourists, it's fine to sell an investment product to investors, but those are usually not mass audience initiatives, right? Because you're trying to target specific markets. Of course, reputation is a mass audience thing, right? Because you're trying to influence everybody's perception. And in that sense, we shouldn't also focus too much on the word dull. We've heard this before. I don't think people actually mean that they know that the country is dull. The problem is they don't know anything about the country. And this is actually confirmed if you're looking at our familiarity measurement. So part of the Nation Brands Index also asks people how familiar are you with the country. And there Slovakia is one of the lowest in the ranking. So people just don't know anything about Slovakia. won't be able to point it on the map. Of course, not your neighbors, obviously, but the wider audience.
I was just about to say that there are, of course, regional specifics, and when you say people don't know about Slovakia, then we would probably have to go from continent to continent and so on and so on, and it has to do with perceptions of historical perceptions of countries. We all learned some history in the school, and you know, history. It's not a one single explanation of the history that is applicable in the whole world. I mean, our neighbors are taught different history than we are.
Sure.
How much of that is, how much of your job is just trying to work with all kinds of regional prejudices and like simplifications? You know, whenever I show up in a different continent, and not whenever, but sometimes or a lot of times, oh, it's just a commie guy, you know, coming from a communist country or from Russia, and so on and so on. And it's, you know, when you want to overcome it in the discussion, you're sort of thinking, no, just another guy that, you know, thinking that, you know, I'm a commie guy. But then you have different countries, and you worked in different countries which has different type of views or prejudices when people look at them. I don't want to name any country, but like every country with some sort of a negative reputation, long-term negative reputation. Well, should they care to like explain it, go into the topic, or they should just forget about it and set a set of new goals in communication and find a new role in the world, like you defined it, like how Slovakia is influencing your life?
Well, communications is a dead-end street because no matter how much money you spend on it, people aren't interested, they're not listening. So it's just a waste of money. Again, repeat, we're not talking about sector-specific promotion. If you're selling holidays, yes, you must communicate. I don't know, it's a difficult one. Last time I checked, there were more than 200 countries in the planet. And most of us really, really don't have time or the desire to think about, know about more than a handful of those countries. The research suggests that most people in the world only ever think about 3 countries. They think about their own country a little bit, not a lot, unless it's contested, and then they think about it all the time. They think about a big important country that seems to be very important in their world, like the United States or China, and then a third country which is privately important to them. You know, I'm really interested in Chile because I'd like to go there on holiday one day, or because my daughter is studying there, or something like that. That's it, 3 countries. So that basically means that to all intents and purposes, 197 countries, for the majority of the world's population, just don't exist. So expecting people, asking people to go beyond those superficial stereotypes is asking a lot, because the stereotypes are really useful.
Oh, absolutely.
They act as a shorthand. They're signposts that help us navigate in a very, very complex, globalized environment. But it's not just that. It's not just simplification, which you have to respect. It's a human attribute. It's sensible. It's evolutionarily practical to do that. But it's also our habit of categorizing things. We like to categorize because it appears to make the world simpler. So if I say, oh, you're a European guy, super, I've figured you out. I can put you in a box. You're a Slovakian guy, if I know what that means. Great, you're an ex-communist, or maybe still a communist. I can put you in that box. And that's what we all do. And in my opinion, it's one of the worst habits of humanity. Because if we all took the time, and it's just laziness.
Oh, yeah.
If we took the time and the trouble to particularize a little bit more, you know, who are you as a person, irrespective of your nationality or your political allegiances or your gender or anything like that, and a little bit less of this categorization, then the world would be a much happier place. There'd be far less prejudice, but people are too busy. And you know, I understand that. And it requires a bit of an effort. So a lot of what we're doing is trying to accommodate the fact that this is what humanity does. It uses shorthands. This is why I first used the word brand, because that's what a brand is. It's a ridiculous, childish simplification of something very complex. And we just have to accept that that's the way the human mind works, en masse, not individually, but en masse, that's how it works, and work with those tools. And they're very, very, very simple, very brutal, very rough, very approximate tools, but we do our best.
all countries deal with cliches and stereotypes.
Oh yeah,
Just
yeah,
everybody.
yeah.
So there's no except. Even countries that are in the top 10 of the Nation Brands Index, that have the best reputations, even there you will see that countries, that people use cliches and stereotypes to understand them. And it's usually not a good idea just to throw those aside and say, oh, that's cliche, stereotypes, outdated, that's not us anymore. Because those are actually the hooks that you have in people's minds to get into, to generate interest, to get their attention.
That was my question: how to actually use it as a benefit in potential communication, because at least the other person or other party knows something about you, you know. So
it's not necessarily in the communication; it's a hook. It can also be in your behavior. So this is something that country X does. Oh, that makes sense because we already know that, you know, this is what we think of. We already know this cliche. So it makes sense that that country, that this is what they do, because, you know, you hook on to the preconceived ideas.
So an example of that is Mexico. Mexico is a country with big image problems because it's got to the stage where it is pretty much associated with its problems. It's associated with organized crime, with violent crime, with corruption, and so on and so forth. So the solution in a situation like that is not to try and sweep all of that bad stuff under the carpet, because, you know, public opinion is not an idiot. You know, plus
people are not stupid.
They're really not stupid, and they know if you're doing that, and they will completely ignore it. Apart from anything else, they like the stories because they're kind of exciting. It's like a reality show combined with a violent thriller. And, you know, let's be honest, it's kind of nice if you're sitting in the safety of your own home in the United States and you read in the newspaper about terrible things going on in Mexico. It's like being at home during a thunderstorm. You feel kind of safe and cozy. And people love those stories. And if you try and take them away, it won't work. Human beings will never voluntarily downgrade from an exciting negative story to a boring positive story.
Absolutely.
You're just wasting your time.
Absolutely.
So what we try to do is we try to give a twist to people's perceptions, behaviorally, not in communication sense, so that you move on from what they already believe, but it's connected to what they already believe. And in the case of Mexico, it's basically, the argument behind it is, you associate Mexico with organized crime and violence and corruption. That means it's an expert in those subjects. Now, those are subjects that you suffer from wherever you live. In your country, there are problems with drugs, there's problems with organized crime, there's problems with corruption. Mexico is a country that has so much experience of this area. They are working hard every day to tackle those problems for their own benefit and for the benefit of every other country that does it. So one of the things we got Mexico to do was to double, triple, quadruple the number of international conferences they held on tackling violent crime, sharing their experience, showing to the world we're here to help. And our experience is precious. So you're taking the cliche and you're just turning it around. And sometimes that's a good way to do it.
So, say you have a new country as a client. How do you do the diagnosis of your patient, so to speak? Because they all come to you with, okay, I have this problem, I have this problem, how to fix it. So what's the first couple of steps when somebody hires you in terms of process? How big is your team, by the way?
It's just us.
Oh, okay.
There's no need for a team.
Right.
Teams add cost, they don't add value.
All right.
Well, the team is in the country.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, as I said before, we're doing capacity building. So ultimately our purpose is to train these people within government and elsewhere to understand this and to be able to manage it themselves. Because we don't like this idea where you create dependence on external suppliers. That's not the way that government should run. The first question is, just like a doctor, where does it hurt? And it's always an interesting question, because very often the answer they give is false. It's what doctors would call referred pain. And you know, when you've got a pain here and it's a heart attack. And they say we've got a terrible image. And my immediate assumption is that, okay, you've got a reality problem. Because it's so much more likely if you've got an image problem that it's actually a reality problem. These things don't come from nowhere. It's not like everybody on the planet is going to a secret party and gossiping about you and inventing horrible stories. Yeah. It comes from somewhere. So it's either something you've done or something you've failed to do. Somehow people have got the ingredients of that story. So the next stage is quite a deep analysis of the country, what it's done, its role in the world, lots and lots and lots of research. we are data geeks. Because, I mean, call me old-fashioned, but I think if you're spending public money on anything at all, it should be transparent, measurable, and accountable. And too many countries dive into this sort of operation without any attempt to benchmark it, so you don't even know if it's got better or worse. And, you know, politicians who accept that, that kind of approach to things, they shouldn't be in power. They should be in jail. It's so important to measure these things, and they're entirely measurable.
How do you measure them?
By asking people, by opinion polls. That's the primary technique. That's what we do every year.
So the Nation Brands Index, like we said, it's been running for 20 years. It's 40,000 respondents in 20 countries. It's 70% of the world's population, 77% of the world's economy. So it's the major countries. And it's survey-based. So we ask average consumers, what do you think of these other countries? There's 50 countries in the ranking. Slovakia is not always part of the countries that are being ranked, but it has been, particularly the last few years. And that's how we know that it's a familiarity problem. People just say either they've never heard of Slovakia, or they will say, well, yeah, heard of it, I know it exists, but I don't know anything about it.
And the questionnaire is very detailed. We go very deep. We sort of say to people, for example, imagine you were the manager of a company. Would you like to hire somebody from Slovakia to work for you? And from all of those questions, they come at it slightly from the side. We don't say, do you think it's a nice country? Because people don't know. They've never asked themselves that question. But you focus in on these very, very specific angles. And from this, the combination of those 30, 40, 50 questions, we can deduce an enormous amount about people's prejudices. We sometimes call it the index of ignorance, because you actually find out much more about what people don't know than what they do know. And that's one of the reasons why we only bother to measure 50 countries every year, because once you go below 50, people just don't know anything about any of those other countries. It's really quite depressing. Another thing that's important when we talk to potential clients, when it's a new country doing this for the first time, or they want to have a serious approach, is to build a coalition of the willing. As you argued, there are many agencies already there. There is a tourism, usually, and we know that this is the case in this country. There is a tourism agency, there's an investment promotion agency, there's an export promotion agency. Obviously, there's a Ministry of Foreign Affairs, you've got public diplomacy units, you've got missions abroad. So there's a whole apparatus of institutions and agencies, that what we call externally facing agencies. So whose job it is to communicate and interact and engage with the outside world. And you want to bring those together at least, and that's part of what we did yesterday with a masterclass, to teach them what is this thing called brand, and what can we do, and what works and what doesn't work, and how is it different from marketing. And usually part of the problem is that for instance, the tourism agency will say, well, how can we brand this country as a tourism destination? And the export agency says, well, how can we brand this country for our car manufacturer? And another agency says, well, we want to brand it as a nuclear power country, or whatever it is, right? And those are the wrong questions to ask. You don't brand yourself as a product. It's a very deeper underlying challenge that you have. And all those agencies need to understand that and then come together, because they all really do understand that their success depends to a large extent on the image of the country, the reputation of the country. Bring them together to get onto a concerted effort, build a grand strategy, and then think about how can we behave differently so that we can establish this new reputation.
But isn't that the most common mistake, that they really think that it's like branding a product?
Yeah. Yeah. And I blame myself. I should never have coined that stupid phrase, because it makes people think that it's something to do with marketing. And with that also comes the expectation that, as I said before, it's hugely expensive. And so all of the conversations are about the wrong things. They're about, where can we get the money from? Can we really afford this? Can we justify it? It really, really shouldn't cost more than a country can comfortably afford, because it might just be a change in the way that the president speaks on certain topics when he or she is at international meetings. Something like that can be a really important part of positioning the country, and that costs nothing. So the moment somebody starts saying, you know, we need 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 million euros to do this, you should be very suspicious. Because if you're spending that kind of money on pushing out a message, it's probably because you're trying to make people listen to something they don't want to hear.
A make-up story.
Yeah.
A make-up story.
Propaganda.
Yeah.
I mean, propaganda can work internally, as you know. You're a generation that's experienced it.
No.
If you control...
It didn't.
Well, it didn't on you. But no, but seriously, I mean, if you control the routes of communication, the channels of communication right across the country, and you can get one story out there, the sad fact is that human beings eventually will buy that story because there's no other on offer. Not everybody, but a large majority will do it. But that's never worked internationally, because internationally you don't control any damn thing.
Yep.
And all of the evidence is, and it's one of the good things about globalization, all the evidence is that the harder you try to push a particular story, the harder the pushback becomes. And the system, such as it is, will resist that. It resists propaganda. Now, that doesn't mean that certain countries cannot be quite effective at distorting the messages out there and creating confusion, which is Russia's speciality.
Yep.
They do that very effectively indeed. And that was quite a smart move, to understand you may not be able to build anything, but you can certainly damage things. And that's the biggest risk at the moment.
That's also the easiest thing to do, just to destroy it.
It's easy and it's cheap.
Yep, absolutely.
We can see it in our measurements that this volatility, and this is why thinking about your country's reputation is becoming more and more important, because we see it in the data that the volatility is increasing with social media and globalization, and particularly with fragmentation and polarization that is happening in the world over the last 5 to 10 years. This has really had an impact.
Let me tell you the curious story of Lionel Messi's shirt.
Tell me.
So I had a call from a friend of mine who works in the French government, and he was in a panic, and he said, "Simon, how come France has been dropping in the Nation Brands Index?" And I said, "It hasn't, don't be silly." Because France has got a huge reputation. Everybody loves France. It's written into the human DNA that you have to love France. He said, "Go check." So I checked, and he's right. My God, France has actually been dropping quite steadily. And so we looked at the data and we investigated, and it was weeks and weeks. We couldn't find any reason. And then suddenly we noticed that actually most of the negative scoring for France was coming from Latin America, and very specifically from Argentina. And this was curious, because Argentina is a country that has always adored France almost more than anybody else.
Yeah.
Argentina scores for France. They love it. The Argentinians love France. And I was talking to my son-in-law, who is Argentinian. And like all Argentinians, he worships a god known as Lionel Messi. Lionel Messi has divinity.
Okay.
You've got it? It's Paris Saint Germain. So
now I got your theory of 3 countries, so here we go.
There you go. And basically what happened was that Lionel Messi, an Argentinian god, went to play football for Paris Saint Germain. And Paris Saint Germain were not very happy with his performance. They figured he wasn't really trying hard enough. And so the PSG fans got very angry. And one PSG fan had the brilliant idea of getting a Lionel Messi shirt and stapling it to the floor at the entrance of a pub in Paris, with a sign next to it saying, "Don't forget to wipe your feet." And this caused the burning of flags and everything else that happens if you insult a major religion. And the Argentinians, and just to be on the safe side, the Mexicans and the Brazilians as well, were so infuriated by this that the next time the Nation Brands Index study came around, they placed France bottom of the list, below Israel, below Iran. And it was so powerful that it actually impacted the global position of France. Now, not for long, okay, because countries are attached to their traditional images by a strong piece of elastic, and you can stretch it, but it nearly always goes back again. But this was, joking apart, a really, really upsetting thing to see, because for years I've been saying that the Nation Brands Index is the most boring social survey ever created, because people just don't change their minds about countries. Suddenly it's not true anymore. Mm-hmm. Suddenly we see that people's views about countries have become incredibly volatile. They go all over the place. And governments, poor people, have to deal with this every day. Suddenly this is not a continuous, reliable, robust phenomenon. This is a thing that can change by the day. How do you deal with that? The first thing you have to do is to know about it, to measure it, to understand what's happening, because it could have a huge impact on the country.
And obviously this is social media. This is a story that wouldn't have emerged with such ferocity if it was mainstream media. But because people are sharing it on social media and becoming very angry, so it's really caused by that.
So it's technology that like biggest driver or creator of challenges in communication?
It's a combination.
Because it could be also an advantage.
In certain cases it is. It gives voices to people who deserve voices, who didn't have them before, and there are forums out there for experts to discuss things, if only they have the sense and the ability to make sure that people actually pay attention. There's a lot of good stuff on social media, of course there is. But the real problem are the advertising algorithms that drive the main platforms, and as we know, they feed on moral outrage and anger. And fear and other strong emotions. And that has the effect of polarizing every debate, pushes people to one side or to the other. And human beings are very susceptible to this because we are all tribal creatures by instinct and by desire, for all the reasons we've spoken about. And what that does is it basically completely clears the middle ground. So any possibility of a nuanced response becomes impossible, at least on social media. So you look at a situation like the war between Israel and Hamas at the moment. This is a situation that more than anything else needs to be clearly understood. It's immensely complex. It stretches back into history. Both sides should be held accountable for the shocking things that they've done. And it seems like the simplest thing in the world to ask for, just to say, could somebody please admit that maybe there's fault on both sides? And it's a mark of how difficult things have become that now seems further away than the moon. That's the last thing you can say, there's fault on both sides. No, one is right, one is wrong. And I'll fight you if you disagree with me. It's just brought out the worst in humanity.
Absolutely. Coming back to Slovakia, you were here, you did your lessons, so to speak, or how your colleagues call it, teaching. I like that word, by the way. We are a polarized nation. We are split like any other country in Europe. You know, we had 3 elections in a row now. We had, I think, 4 or 5 prime ministers in 4 years. So that, you know, speaks for itself. But on the other hand, you could see yesterday that like the will to do things better and to approach it properly and to learn from mistakes, because we have done some mistakes in the past, considering that the country is like a brand or is like a thing. How important is the overall management? And then if you have such a systematic topic, issue or problem, you need a leader behind it.
Yeah. I think one of the challenges in today's world is people use a lot of rude words to describe the right. The people on the left use a lot of rude words to describe the right. Populism, nativism, as if somehow the fact that such huge chunks of the population find that appealing, as if that was somehow irrelevant. It's still populism, it's still nativism, it's still ignorant. It's, by definition, if that's what people want, there's something in it that makes sense to people. And therefore there's some legitimacy in it. And I think, again, it's the polarization that's the problem, not the views. If you're really honest about it, and I've done this myself over and over and over again, I'm not a political creature. And the reason I'm not a political creature is because I simply find it impossible to define myself. And I think that if we were all honest and thoughtful about it, we'd probably find the same thing. You know, it's like kids when they're asked to vote these days. My children, they don't buy albums, they buy tracks. And so the idea that you have to buy a whole album of political thought and political approach from one team and hope that somehow that always accords with everything you believe in, it can't work.
You can only be disappointed. You
can only be disappointed. And one of the things that the conservative right hasn't yet done to a very satisfactory degree is to articulate what that means in the international environment. What impact does that have on foreign affairs? What impact does that have? Because far too often, nativism, patriotism, nationalism, call it what you will, means regarding the rest of the planet as an enemy. And this is a dead-end street because it's not an enemy. You cannot survive. We, as a species, cannot survive unless we have working relationships with other countries. So you have to look to it, and you have to find a way of articulating that from a right-wing point of view as well as a left-wing point of view. Both sides get it wrong. And if you ask me what is the gold standard of good governance in the 21st century, I would say it's the ability to harmonize the domestic and the international agenda. So you're doing the right thing for your population whilst at the same time doing no harm to anybody else. Because any other behavior is ultimately suicidal for humanity. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people say, yeah, we publish this thing called the Good Country Index, which measures how much good and how much harm countries export. Do they damage the world outside their own borders? And so many people, governments, particularly in developing countries, say, we're too busy working on our domestic problems. We've got too many challenges to be worrying about other countries. Other countries can look after themselves. They've got their own governments. We don't believe in interfering. But that's such bullshit. Mm-hmm. The fact of the matter is that if we all leave everybody to do what they feel like doing for their own internal purposes, then, well, we can see the result today.
Yeah,
everything's just falling apart. Yeah. It's just a mess. And one of the things that we've discovered over the years, advising governments on policy, is that it is perfectly possible to combine the domestic and the international agenda, to say, let's do the right thing at home, and at the same time, through collaboration, through open-mindedness, through vision, see how that could, A, do no harm, but maybe B, do some good in other countries at the same time. And it's not only possible, it's dynamic. It means you make better policies because you're open to other influences and all the rest of it. So it's not about charity. It's not about giving money you don't have to poor countries. It's about seeing every problem for what it is, which is fundamentally a global problem. There are no domestic problems anymore. Anything that happens in Slovakia that's a problem happens in every other country as well. So countries just need to figure out whether they're right or left. Just drop your political prejudices for a moment and look at the writing on the wall. The ship is sinking. Unless we work together, we're going to fall, all of us. What was it that Benjamin Franklin said? Unless we hang together, we will assuredly hang separately.
Time is flying. And I will have to come. I mean, we could talk forever. Thank you for coming. Last question. We believe in reading in SITA. And we always ask our guests, what are they reading currently? What they would recommend to our readers? Something that inspires you, or something around your area of what you do. What would be your recommendation?
Okay, well, I always have one fiction and one non-fiction book on the go at the same time, because otherwise you go crazy. The fiction book I'm rereading for about the 7th time, is by a British author called John Buchan, B-U-C-H-A-N, and it's called Greenmantle. He's famous for a thriller he wrote called The 39 Steps, which was made into a movie and everybody knows about it. Greenmantle is a book that was written in the early years of the First World War, and it talks about a rising catastrophe between the Muslim world and the Christian world. And it's incredibly prophetic and incredibly interesting and very, very exciting and very well written. So you have to suspend your political correctness because it was written in a period where they said things in a way that
there was no such a thing.
Right. We don't say things that way today, and it's sexist and it's racist and all the rest of it. But if you can just put that to one side and say it's not his fault he was born in that period and not in today's period, it's a really, really fascinating read. And then the non-fiction one my son gave me because he said I'm pig ignorant about artificial intelligence. And I can't remember the exact title, but it's something like Artificial Intelligence Made Simple for Thinking Humans. And I'm working on that book.
Yeah, he's going to catch up on him.
Robert? Like Simon, I don't do fiction, so it's all non-fiction. Simon set up a journal in the early days when we were starting in this topic, called Journal of Place Branding and Public Diplomacy. I'm still co-editor of that. I'm phasing it out. Somebody's taking over. But that means I'm still doing a lot of reading of academic papers that are being submitted to the journal. And then I love history, but usually that is linked to projects that we're doing. So I'm now working in one of the cities in the Low Countries, so I'm reading up on the history of that, because I always believe that by reading up on the history of a place, we can find underlying currents that will help us in coming up with good strategies for the future image of places.
So your second job will be historian. You want that. Thank you for coming.
It was a pleasure. Let's do it again sometime.
Yeah, please, let's do it. Thanks a lot.